5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. Has it been live? Say what's up to the people, Dad.
It's a sad day for the world. It's been a sad time for the world for the past 10 plus days. We live not just in a time of turmoil, but a time of death and destruction. And whatever the rationale, and we'll talk about that in a moment, death, destruction, particularly of innocent civilians, should always disturb us, always make us sad.
All right, let's get right into it. The war in Iran continues, our main topic. Multiple news outlets have reported that video, satellite images, and expert analysis indicate that the United States was likely responsible for the February 28th bombing of an Iranian school for young girls, contradicting President Trump, who said unsupported claims of that the deadly strike was, quote, done by Iran.
This, of course, you've heard this before. It's one of my biggest complaints about the media, where they say Trump claims this without evidence, or what Trump says is unsupported. That is misleading. What they should be saying is Trump says this in contradiction to the evidence, not just without evidence.
I'm going to pause you for a second. We got an echo.
Oh, no.
All right, we're back.
Yeah. This has been one of my main media complaints, that they often say Trump claims this without evidence, or what Trump claims is unsupported. What they should be saying would be much more accurate and much more informative to their audience would be Trump says this contrary to the evidence. What Trump says is untrue. Maybe the media has been listening to me, and maybe they're picking up that a little bit more. It's not just that Trump's claim that the Iranians did it is contrary, is unsupported. It is contrary to the evidence. And I'll get to that in a moment. But I want to make a couple of bigger points. You know, the more accurate claim is Trump is lying, right, Sam?
Seems so, yeah.
Yeah. But that's not right either. Because to be telling a lie, you have to know that there's a truth. And you have to know that you're contradicting the truth. That is the very nature of a lie. If I don't know the truth, and I'm not stating the truth because I don't know it or shouldn't know it, that's not a lie, right, Sam?
Right.
Now, we need a new term for Trump, a stronger term than lie. And the reason is Trump has no conception of the truth. The truth is something that never enters his mind. It's not as if I know this is false, but I'm going to say it anyway. No, you got to understand Trump is almost unique in this regard, and maybe like other authoritarians across history. Truth is not something that ever enters his mind. It's not something he ever ponders or ever considers or ever worries about. The only thing that occupies his mind and that he cares about is what can I say that will benefit me, either in a positive sense or in the negative sense of trying to avoid an attack, avoid criticism. The idea of whether what I'm saying is true or not has absolutely no relevance to the way Donald Trump operates. I pointed this out 9 years ago when I published my book, The Case for Impeachment, in 2017, and had a whole chapter about what I called at that time Trump's lies, but I also made this point, perhaps not as strongly, now having witnessed 9 more years of Trump, as I am doing now. We need a new term that's, even stronger. I would say he's a fabricator. He fabricates reality to suit his purposes. That is even more pernicious, more destructive than a lie. Because a lie can be corrected if you present the truth to someone and they're open to the truth. But a fabrication can never be corrected because it is unhinged, unconnected to reality. That is why Trump continues to insist upon the fabrication that he really won the 2020 election and won it big in a landslide. He clings to that fabrication despite innumerable debunkings by his own Justice Department, his own cybersecurity operation, 60 judges, some of them appointed by Trump himself, investigations by independent organizations, including one that Trump hired in Arizona and that proved that Biden legitimately won Arizona, investigations by state election officials, most of them Republicans. It doesn't matter. This is probably the greatest refutation of any major claim from a president in the history of the country. But it makes no dent in Donald Trump because the concept of truth is foreign to him. The only thing that matters is his fabricated reality, which has nothing to do with the real world and therefore is impervious to any kind of debunking, any kind of facts, any kind of contradiction. So he's beyond the liar. He is a fabricator of reality. The other thing that's so frightening about this and about the whole war is the way in which Donald Trump, and even exceeded by Secretary of Defense, or as he called it, War, Pete Hegseth, they seem to revel in, they seem to celebrate the death and destruction, much of which, like the destruction of this school, involves civilians who have no role in the Iranian government or the Iranian military. Regardless, we're dealing with human beings. And the killing of human beings, the destruction of their homeland, is always a sad thing. I can understand saying, we had to do this. We understand how horrible it is. We understand war is destructive and awful, but we had higher reasons for doing this. That's not what you hear from them. What you hear, especially from Hegseth, is his reveling, his taking pride in death and destruction. Just as we saw the death and destruction on these boats, where there's no due process, no proven link to cartels or drug trafficking.
You're talking about the boats in the Caribbean and
in the Pacific okay. That they're blowing up, defenseless boats with no due process, no proof of what they're involved in. I don't think we've ever seen that before. Lots of presidents have gone to war. Lots of secretaries of defense have gone to war. But I don't recall ever, and I go back to the Eisenhower administration. Would you think I go back to Lincoln?
Yeah, I thought you went back to Lincoln.
Yeah, well, maybe. A lot of people think that. But at any rate, I can never remember a president, and particularly the Secretary of Defense, exulting, celebrating death and destruction, rather than making the humane point, we have a war to win, it's very important, there's a higher purpose, it's unfortunate that we have this death and destruction. And we saw the same thing with death and destruction here in the United States. The Border Patrol and ICE who killed, and these are homicides. The question is whether they're justifiable has never been answered. But they are homicides. They're not suicides. They're not accidents. They're not diseases. They seem to revel in that as well. We're wiping out these domestic terrorists. What did one of the agents who killed one of them say? Filthy bitch or something like that, Sam? And we got an equally derisive comment, boo-hoo, after the killing of Preddy. Human life just seems to be devalued. It doesn't matter. And that is truly horrific. That is what leads us right down into the abyss. There couldn't be much more horrific than disregarding the destruction of human life. Every loss of a human being is a tragedy. It may be to some higher purpose, but that doesn't make it less of a tragedy. And I can't repeat that and emphasize that often enough. Now, with respect to the fabrication that it was really Iranian missile that hit the school, killing about 175 people, most of them children, about whom we should have the greatest compassion and empathy, but there's none shown by Hegseth or Trump. There is now pretty definitive evidence that it was an American missile strike that caused it. And by the way, the man who has so blackened his soul that it's got to be crumbling into ash, Marco Rubio, gives the ultimate deflection, right? What's the ultimate deflection, Sam? We're looking into it, right? Don't hold your breath when they're going to finish looking into it. We've still seen nothing about their looking into the death of Renee Good or Alex Preddy, have we, after many weeks have passed? Nothing. Zero. And I suspect we're going to hear nothing, zero, except continued fabrications from Donald Trump. Well, here's just one of the many independent outlets that has exploded Trump's fabrication, although obviously it's had no effect on him. This is an article from the New York Times a couple of days ago. It's headlined, U.S. Tomahawk hit naval base behind Iranian school, video shows. In other words, there is video evidence of what happened there. No Iranian missiles, just U.S. Tomahawk missiles. The article says the evidence contradicts President Trump's claim that Iran was responsible for a strike at the school that killed 175 people, most of them children. And this article, Sam, was not written by a couple of reporters. It was written by two folks. One named Malachi Brown, who is identified as an expert in verifying online imagery, which is what we're looking at in this video, and John Ismay, a former Navy bomb disposable officer. So we're talking about two individuals who had real expertise in assessing what happened to that school.
And don't they say that Iran doesn't even have any Tomahawk missiles, right?
That's correct. I don't even think Israel has any Tomahawk missiles.
No?
I don't believe so.
I thought we do sell some.
I'm not sure. But
Okay,
at any rate, Iran certainly
exactly
does not have them. And I do not believe we've given Tomahawk missiles out to anyone. They point out, these two experts, the video of the strike was independently verified by the Times. We compared features visible in the footage to new satellite images captured the days after the strikes. The video was filmed independently from a construction site opposite the base and shows a worn dirt path across a grassy area and piles of debris, also evident in recent satellite imagery, bolstering its credibility. The video we reviewed also comports with other verified videos taken in the immediate aftermath of the strikes. How does that compare to the evidence Donald Trump has presented?
Seems like the opposite of
right. And what evidence has Donald Trump presented?
None. He never presents any evidence.
Here we have these verified videos analyzed by experts, and this is only one of a group of experts that analyzed, as compared to Donald Trump just asserting things, the way he asserted for 5 years that Barack Obama was an illegitimate president because he was born in Africa, despite multiple debunkings, the way he's asserted for 6 years that he really won in 220, despite the greatest debunkings of probably any claim in the history of the presidency. So, the Times has identified the weapon, as we pointed out, as a Tomahawk cruise missile. And I think I'm right here. A weapon that neither the Israeli military nor the Iranian military has. In other words, it's pretty definitive. Only the U.S. has this weapon. You cannot pin the bombing on the Iranians. You can't even pin this one on the Israelis. They also have from U.S. Central Command a video of several Tomahawks being launched from Navy ships on the day that the Iranian base and the school was hit.
This is from PBS News. They say, experts tell PolitiFact that the only countries that have Tomahawks are the U.S., Japan, UK, Australia, and the Netherlands.
I don't think the Netherlands was firing here, do you?
No.
No. I mean, the evidence is just overwhelming. And as I said, this expert analysis from the Times is just one of many analyses that have firmly established it was a U.S. Tomahawk missile that none of the other belligerents in this war possess. Even General Dan Crane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, admitted that the U.S. forces were carrying out strikes in southern Iran at the time that the naval base and the school was hit. This was an area targeted by strikes in the first 100 hours of the operation.
To be clear, I'm looking this up. It seems that it hit a military base near the school. It didn't actually hit the school itself.
It hit next to the school. But these are weapons with 300 pounds of TNT. It doesn't have to be a direct hit.
As much blame as there is for Hegseth and Trump, you got to wonder why the Islamic Republic there is putting a girls' school next to a military base. That does seem a little bit strange now.
It does seem a little bit strange, but that doesn't excuse it.
No, of course not.
Yeah. Look, I have no brief for the Iranian regime. I despise the Iranian regime in every aspect. One of the worst trends throughout human history is extremism religion. You know, you can go all the way back to the Bible. And, my supposed people, the Jews, were celebrated for slaughtering and destroying, other peoples at the command of God. Look at the horrific crusades, slaughters of women, children, innocent people on both sides. The attacks on the so-called heretics by the Catholic Church, the war in Ireland between the Protestants and the Catholics, the conflicts in the Middle East between the Shias, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. There is no end to the violence and destruction motivated by extreme religion. And as I explained before, once you believe you are ordained by God, on a mission by God, then that justifies anything. Then you can commit whatever atrocities because it has divine sanction. So no, I have no brief for this regime, but, I'm not an Iranian, and my first responsibility is to deal with our president right here is doing.
Right. All right. With that, do you have anything else about Iran before we move on?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't, we've never ever seen a president take us to a major war with a video, 2:30 in the morning, in the wee hours of the morning, with no clear rationale. We've never seen anything like that. And certainly in the, 10 days plus since then, there have been, 6 or 7 rationales, most of which contradict one another. We know Iran was not about to attack the United States. The intelligence is crystal clear on that. What capacity do they have to launch a war against the United States, Sam?
Probably not much.
Zero.
Oh.
They don't have the missiles, they don't have the planes, they don't have the ships. You know, it's a long way from Iran to the United States. Zero capacity to attack the United States. And the intelligence did not show any imminent attack was coming. You know, then there was the explanation that they were going to attack Israel and Israel was going to retaliate. And then if Israel retaliated, Iran would retaliate against us, you know, implying something I do believe, and we've talked about a lot, that Trump is manipulated by these horrible world leaders like Putin, Orban, and Netanyahu. But here's the thing. All right, let's say the most reasonable justification, Sam, is we want to permanently, or at least in the very long term, destroy their capacity for a nuclear weapon, even though we know it was maybe a decade away or certainly years away, and destroy basically their capacity to wage war against our allies in the Middle East. How do we do that? Let's say we destroy 80% of their capacity, right? And then we stop the war. What are they going to do?
Just start building again?
They're going to start building again, and they're going to be more motivated than ever, particularly to get a nuclear weapon. Because what set of nations has the U.S. never attacked? Nations with nuclear weapons. North Korea is 10 times, 20 times, I don't care what metric you want to use, vastly more threatening to the United States than Iran. It's not close. You know, they have missiles. They have an incredible military. They have nuclear weapons. Why didn't we attack Iran, North Korea, Sam?
Well,
they have nukes.
We almost did in Trump's first term.
Yeah, that would have been, you know, we don't want to risk a nuclear war. So they will be very motivated to develop a nuclear weapon, to rebuild all their capacities. It's 90 million people. You can't kill enough of them to stop them from rebuilding. It's a very advanced society in many ways. There's only one way you can stop them, and what's that, Sam? Occupy the country indefinitely, because as soon as you stopped, they're going to rebuild. So on its own terms, the most plausible explanation makes absolutely no sense. You cannot bomb them into submission in that way. Never been done in the history of the world. We dropped more bombs on North Vietnam during the Vietnam War than we had dropped on all the theaters of the world in World War II. Did we win that Vietnam War, Sam?
No.
No. You know, bombing is of limited utility. It kills a lot of people, destroys a lot of things, doesn't create democracies. It doesn't typically win wars. So unless we're prepared to indefinitely occupy a country of 90 million people, which I don't think even Trump has the stomach to do, but God knows what Trump might do, they're just going to rebuild.
Seems like Trump already wants out to me. Seems like he's getting a little squeamish and he's already feeling like the sooner this ends, the better. That's the vibe I'm getting from him, at least.
You may be right. You know, you're very good at sensing these bombs. What do they call Trump? What's that nickname?
Taco.
Taco, right?
Right. Especially with Pete Hegseth saying this is just the beginning, and then Trump saying that we're nearing the end. I'm just getting the sense that he doesn't want this happening for much longer.
It's a political disaster for him.
Exactly.
It's pinching the economy, and that's always the first thing that voters respond to. And most Americans oppose this war, which is very unusual, because typically right at the beginning of a war, there's a rally round the flag effect. Even in Vietnam, I believe this is the first American war since public opinion has been measured that a majority of Americans are against the war. I don't think that has ever happened before in the modern history of the country. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection of all the polls, of all the wars since, they began polling, which would be beginning around World War II.
Well, even in Iraq, they didn't, start out with a bombing campaign, say they destroyed all the quote-unquote weapons of mass destruction, and then 3 months later say that we're at an imminent threat from weapons of mass destruction. I mean, just the timeline and the rhetoric and just the series of events that have happened through this Trump administration are just so nonsensical. It's kind of hard for anybody to just sit back and give two thumbs up on this.
Right. That's why this war is unique.
Right.
Unique in its condemnation by the American people. This is a dead loser politically for Trump, both on it's the war on its own terms and the pinch on the American economy. That's why we'll talk about the SAVE Act in a moment, but that's why he's so desperate to pass this so-called SAVE Act. I would call it the Suffering Act, not the SAVE Act.
Another thing, too, is I think Americans already with, it was already 2 to 3 years of the Israel-Hamas debacle. I think Americans were already sort of fed up with Israel. And now the fact that Israel is all involved and might have pulled us into this, it just feels like the perfect storm for Americans to hate what's going on right now.
You couldn't be more right, Aside from all the problems I've outlined, as you say, public opinion was not primed for this.
No.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah. And given the fact that the Trump administration and himself and all his cronies in 2024 were bellyaching about, never-ending wars, conflicts in the Middle East, America first. I mean, again, they couldn't have done a worse setup for this war possible.
Right. What did he say? I'm going to end wars, never start wars, when he started, 7 or 8 wars already?
Yeah. All right, our next topic of this evening. Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat, her old seat, is up for grabs. Georgia's 14th District special election was held today, March 10th, 2026, with Trump-endorsed Republican Clay Fuller and Democrat Sean Harris advancing from a crowded field to a runoff. Let's take a look at the results as they stand now.
They should be mostly in, right?
Let's see. 88% in. Sean Harris is at 36.9%. The Republican Clayton Fuller is at 35.2%.
This is pretty stunning. Obviously, this election will not decide the seat.
Right.
Right.
Well, they're going to a runoff.
They're going to a runoff.
Yeah.
But this is a deep red seat. Marjorie Taylor Greene was arguably one of the most right-wing members of Congress, right?
Yeah.
And, she won overwhelmingly, was incredibly popular in this very, very conservative district. I am certainly not predicting that the Democrat's going to win the runoff, even though he's slightly ahead here, because most of the other candidates are Republicans. And if you add up the Republican vote, it's probably somewhere, close to 60 some odd percent if you put it all together.
Yeah, so the Republican is in second now, but third place is a Republican, fourth place is a Republican, fifth place is a Republican. You don't get a Democrat until sixth place, and they only have 1.4% of the vote.
Now, that doesn't mean all of these folks who voted Republican are going to vote for Fuller if it goes to a runoff.
Right.
But it's probably still an election favorable to Republicans, but the Democrat doing way better than you would expect in one of the deepest red districts in the country.
Right.
He should be more like 26% rather than, 36, 37%. And this continues a trend which we've been talking about a lot on our program, and that is Democrats way outperforming expectations all over the country, including in Georgia in those public service statewide elections. Democrats way outperforming polls and expectations, both in the off-year elections of 2025 and in the special elections. I think Democrats have flipped, I'm not sure how many, something on the order of 20 Republican state legislative seats all over the country. Something on the order of that. I don't remember the exact number, and it keeps changing, but it's a lot. You know how many Democratic seats Republicans have flipped? Zero in state legislatures. And that matters because who will control the redistricting after 2030 census? The state legislatures. So state legislative elections matter a whole lot. Plus, they're a barometer. You know, the fact that it's whatever, some number to zero, you know, some double-digit number to zero is certainly incredibly telling. And these are not Democratic victories. These are Democratic flips.
Right.
Seats previously held by Republicans were flipped in off-year or special elections to Democrats. I don't expect this seat to flip, but it certainly looks like the Democrat is performing well beyond expectations in this kind of conservative district.
Right. Okay. Our next topic of the night. You already alluded to it. The SAVE Act. Donald Trump is renewing his push for the Save America Act after threatening not to sign any bills until Congress approves the legislation. But Trump's calls for congressional action is facing serious doubts from senior House Republicans who aren't convinced it can pass the chamber a third time.
I call this not the SAFE Act, but the Suffering Act.
Oh, that's a good one.
If this act were passed, it would blow a huge hole in American democracy. Why is Trump pushing so hard for this right now, especially in the public reaction against the war and the economy? Because he is incredibly worried that the Republicans are going to take a huge beating in the midterm elections of 2028. So he wants to rig those elections. He's been even open about it. He says, without this, we're going to have a bloodbath. In other words, without the free and fair elections we typically have, Republicans are going to lose big time. He's been open about it. So we have to rig the system. We're going to rig it in a number of ways, in extreme ways. We're going to prohibit mail-in voting except under limited circumstances. Entire states use mail-in voting and have been using it for many years without any issue of fraud. Utah, a solidly red state, has been using mail-in voting for some time without any indications of fraud. Washington, Oregon, other states have been using mail-in voting. And across the country, mail-in voting has become extremely popular, an extremely important way of expressing your vote in an election. And again, with no indication of any kind of consequential fraud. Then he also wants you to have to present documentary proof of your citizenship to register and vote. Do you have a passport, Sam? You do, right?
I think it might be expired.
Yeah. But most Americans don't have a passport. And that makes it real tough to find definitive documentary proof of your birth. Plus, Trump wants to ultimately complicate this with another horrific proposal, and that is to end birthright citizenship. So you would no longer be a U.S. citizen automatically if you're born on U.S. soil and not, you know, the child of a diplomat or an occupying army. That means you have to investigate every single parent of every single child born in America, right, Sam? Because how else would you know whether or not their parents were undocumented immigrants?
Right.
They don't walk into the hospital with a big sign, you know, a big hat like one of Trump's hats saying undocumented immigrant. So that would further complicate this entire endeavor for documentary proof of citizenship. I don't know what you'd have to prove that your parents were not undocumented immigrants. We know how hard it is to prove a negative. At any rate, even under the current system, the best estimate is 21 million Americans of voting age don't have ready access to documentary proof of citizenship. Huge swath of the electorate would be disenfranchised. Not even to mention women whose names have changed since their birth certificate. How would they prove that they're the same person. Yet another set of individuals who could be disenfranchised. And what is the problem they're trying to solve here, Sam? Voting by undocumented immigrants, or not, let's put it more broadly, voting by non-citizens. How common is that?
Not.
It is so uncommon that a non-citizen is more likely to be hit by lightning than to vote in an American election.
Wow.
The numbers are so small, you can't even calculate them. They are tiny fractions of 1%. So to solve a non-existent problem, again, Trump's total fabrication of reality, they potentially would disenfranchise tens of millions of voters with this citizenship requirement, and who knows how many others by prohibiting mail-in voting, which also is a non-problem.
Right.
This could not be more horrific.
Okay, with that, we will move on to our question portion of the show. He needs his drink. He's not drinking soda tonight. He's actually drinking sparkling water.
How about that?
That's pretty impressive.
I'm sparkling tonight.
Hey, shine bright like a diamond. We have almost 800 people watching, but only 300 likes. Make sure you like the stream. It helps us a lot. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Turn on the notification bell so you know we're live. In the question portion of our show, members and donators get in line to get their questions answered by this guy, distinguished professor of history, Al Lichtman.
Maybe you'll answer them.
So, once every 8 episodes, somebody poses a question to me.
I have this feeling.
Yeah.
Just like Trump had the feeling, they were going to attack us. You're going to get a question tonight.
Oh, interesting.
It's a little less serious than a feeling about a war.
These are 3 rapid-fire questions from our good friend George Politis.
Oh, yeah, he's a good friend.
1, I don't think fabricator is strong enough. 2, do you think some...
I got to take them one at a time.
Okay,
Remember,
yes, sir.
I'm old. I'm open to stronger words. But, I was trying to come up with something that was even stronger than lying, that, indicated something different from a lie when you know the truth, but you're not telling it, to something like Trump, where there is no consideration of truth. It's all just a fabricated reality. But
Yeah,
I'm open to stronger words.
I get what you're saying. I think lie is stronger than fabrication.
Probably because it's more common, but it's not as accurate.
Right.
All right, next.
Do you think some Americans sold Iranians these missiles in the black market?
I have no idea, but it wouldn't shock me.
And finally, do you think Trump is helping the Dems in this midterm election?
No question. I'm not sure he's deliberately helping the Dems, but Trump's follies are definitely helping the Dems. We saw in Iraq. Took a while, took years before the American people soured on that war. Remember that, Sam? You were around for that.
No, not really. I was pretty young.
You were too young, huh? Took a while. Really took until Trump, Bush's second term. But once Americans soured on the war, it had a tremendous, devastating effect on Republicans. Democrats took back Congress in 2006, and Obama took back the presidency by not a landslide, but by a very healthy margin in 2008.
Right. This is a donation from Upar Helger. They say, is Pete...
Thank you. These donations help.
They say, is Pete Hegseth a war criminal?
I think so, and I've explained this before. I'll go over it again. It's at least arguable whether he's a war criminal for blowing up these boats and killing people without any due process or any proof. I think he is, but you could make an argument. But there is something about which you can make no argument that is clearly a war crime established by precedent. And that is the killing of the 2 survivors of the very first boat strike who were clinging to wreckage, who posed no threat of delivering narcotics into the United States, no threat of any kind. They're under surveillance by U.S. aircraft, and they blew them up, killed them, after a wait of 40 minutes to an hour. There is an exact precedent to this, and that is the Peleus trial during World War II, when a German U-boat sank the transport ship Peleus under contract to the British. That was not a war crime, because clearly a declared war was going on, unlike what's going on now and Hegseth blowing up the boats. But here's the analogy that's exact. There were a bunch of survivors clinging to the wreckage of the transport. They posed no threat to the submarine, no threat to the personnel, no threat to deliver the cargo, and the commander and officers ordered the machine gunning of the survivors and killed most of them. The crew of the sub was later captured. Something on the order of 5 crewmen, including the commander and other officers, were brought to trial in Britain by the British High Court. They were all found to be guilty of a war crime. It is a war crime to kill helpless survivors of a shipwreck. Big stop, end of story. And the war crime was so severe that the 3 leaders were sentenced to death and executed. So there is a clear precedent, not only that Hegseth committed a war crime, but that this war crime is so serious that back in World War II, when there was a real war going on, it was punished by death.
This is from member Miles Wolfe. Can Dems defund the military or shut down the government during the midterms to avoid Trump meddling?
Shutting down the government will not stop Trump from meddling. He'll just ignore it, find the funds, and go ahead with his meddling. That's not a tactic. Here's the problem. You know, our wisest framers, James Madison and John Adams, great minds, one of the things that they stressed so strongly was we can create a perfect constitution. We can put in place all of these safeguards, right? The separation of powers between the executive and the judiciary and the Congress, so one can check one another. Limitations on the powers of the president. But both Adams and Madison stressed, whatever you can put on paper, in the end can be destroyed by a leader who lacks virtue. Still depends upon the virtue of our leaders and our people, no matter what safeguards you put in place. And unfortunately, we have a leader with zero virtue.
The next question is from our resident Giant fan, James LaGruta.
Is this a Giant question?
No, but he often asks Giants questions, especially during the football season. This is not a Giants question.
And it's not the football season.
And it is not the football season. They say, the administration continues to refer to the conflict in Iran as a war without calling it a war, but military strikes to try and get around the War Powers Act. Your thoughts?
You know, what was it that Shakespeare said?
I don't know.
What is in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. A war by any other name is still a horrific war that kills people and destroys them. When you are launching a military operation against a foreign nation, I don't care what you call it, it is a war. And it is therefore clearly, unambiguously covered by the War Powers Act. But this goes back to my original point about Trump. When you fabricate reality, right, then there is no control. There is no restraint. You can deny anything and everything. Deny that it's a war.
Right.
As nonsensical as that is.
Don't forget to like the stream. This is a $5 donation from Turbid TG1.
That's a new one, I think.
Not sure.
Maybe not. We have so many, it's hard to remember, and I'm old.
If Trump does a 180 and orders a ground invasion, could this end up looking like another Vietnam and hurt them for the midterms?
Absolutely. I think it would be an unmitigated disaster for the midterms. Overwhelmingly, something on the order of well over 60% of Americans oppose putting boots on the ground. When was the last time that did us any good, Sam? You have to go back maybe to Korea.
Yeah.
Where it did good for a while and then turned into a disaster. But certainly, nothing since then in terms of, long-term ground war has turned out well. It will swell American casualties. It will swell Iranian casualties. And unless you're planning on occupying the country indefinitely, it will do no good. It would be a disaster in every sense of the word, a humanitarian, an economic, and a political disaster. But do I put it past Trump? I put nothing past Trump.
Right. Our next question is from Comic Fan. They say,
oh, that's an old friend.
Does the Senate need 60 votes to pass the SAVE Act? And do you think the Democrats will block it?
I do think the Democrats will block it, and maybe even some Republicans might join them to block it. It's not that it takes 60 votes to pass. It's that it takes 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. It's called cloture, ending debate, although it's not real debate. And there's no way they're going to muster 60 votes to end the filibuster. That would mean every Republican is on board along with 7 Democrats. Not going to happen. It's not even crystal clear, given the razor-thin majority that Republicans have in the House, that they'll vote for this bill. Other representatives from Utah who've been using mail-in voting exclusively for some time, going to vote for a bill that ends mail-in voting. I don't think Representative Massey, a strong Trump critic, is going to vote for it. I think, only 2 or 3 defections will defeat it.
This is from member Costly. They say, how much damage has been done to the U.S. standing in the world by this unprovoked war against Iran?
Enormous damage. Trump does not understand the value of soft power. In fact, another one of his fabrications. We're now respected, unlike what we were under that awful Biden. No, we are hated around the world. We have no persuasive power around the world any longer. The only reason people and leaders around the world fall in line behind the United States because of our military power, because they're afraid of us. But that has limited utility. Soft power, persuasive power, leadership by example has always been very important to the United States. And one of the main contrasts until Trump between the United States and dictatorships like Russia and China around the world. I will also add, although it's not in your question, we lost a tremendous amount of soft power when we dismantled our aid programs that over time have been saving millions upon millions of lives in the poorest, most vulnerable countries in the world.
This is a $10 donation from Andrew Carlson. They say, Professor, why do the American public seem more forgiving of GOP governance failures than Democratic ones? On war, the economy, or social strain, they often escape harsher blame. Any context?
Yes, we've been talking about that a lot on this show. And one of the things, among others, that I bash Democrats about is they have been terrible in messaging. For example, Biden had more domestic accomplishments than any president since the 1960s and never conveyed that to the American people, got zero credit for it. It was Biden and Biden alone, not Macron or, Trudeau or the German Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, who stopped the Russians cold from quickly conquering Ukraine and going on to threaten our NATO partners. Again, that somehow didn't come across. Republicans have always been much better at messaging. Democrats seem finally to be getting the message about messaging and seem to be stepping it up. But for a very long time, they have been, especially in comparison to Republicans, incredibly deficient in messaging.
I think you also saw a massive pivot within the GOP with Trump and MAGA. I mean, essentially, the GOP was heading in this direction and suddenly they were heading in this direction, which sort of gave them an escape hatch to sort of, and that's what the Trump administration and Trump did for many years, is degrade the Bushes, talk about rhinos, that sort of saved them from a lot of the downfalls of the GOP in a lot of ways. It's almost like they had a new start.
Yeah, I mean,
in some ways
they had a face.
Yeah.
For movement, you need an ideology, you need an organization, but you also need a face. When Reagan came on in the 80s, that was an enormous boost to American conservatism because they had a face. Same thing with FDR for liberalism in the 1930s.
This is a question from member Alex Kawa. You've indicated before that you don't like to criticize Democrats too much because you want to focus on the real enemy, the GOP.
Well, I don't think I've quite said that.
Yeah, maybe not. However, there are plenty of Democratic politicians who deserve criticism for some of their bad votes or certain statements they make. How do you go about criticizing Democrats without inadvertently boosting the GOP?
I just did criticize Democrats.
That is funny that you just
30
did.
seconds ago. Yes, when I think it's warranted, I've been quite willing to criticize Democrats. And, this criticism is nothing new, Sam, right? I've been bashing the Democrats on this for as long as we've been on the air, which is how long now? We approaching 3 years?
Probably, but I think this fall will be 3 years.
So I've been bashing them forever, but it just so happens, in my view, from my perspective, there have been more serious problems stemming from the GOP, especially since the advent of Trump.
Right. This is from member Dirtier Dog. They say,
one of our buddies.
Are there historic analogies to the current U.S., China, Russia, Iran rivalry?
Oh, of course there are. During the 1930s, the run-up to World War II, there were tremendous rivalries between the United States, Germany, and Japan. We had an undeclared naval war with Germany, shooting war in the Atlantic. And, of course, we imposed severe economic sanctions on Japan, including an oil embargo, which many analysts said was what motivated Japan to make the big blunder of their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So this is not new.
Right. When do you think the Dems will have 60 in the Senate again? Also, why was Fetterman the only Dem to vote against limiting the War Powers Resolution?
Yeah, I don't get Fetterman.
He's so I don't get him.
He seems totally erratic, and I don't know what his core principles are, to tell you the truth. It's going to be a long time before either party gets 60 votes. We're just too polarized for any party to have that kind of overwhelming majority in the Senate. For the most part, we have blue states like Maryland, with 2 Democratic senators, or red states like Mississippi with 2 Republican senators. Not that many split states anymore.
I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but how do people in Vietnam today view Ngo
Diem?
Oh, you're smart.
I know who he is, yes.
Do they see him as a dictator, or do some people think he was trying to protect South Vietnam during the Cold War?
I cannot speak
yeah, that's a tough question to answer.
To tell you the truth. But he was a pretty bad leader. He was caught up in the 1963 coup, another one of those coups initiated by the United States. We didn't assassinate him, but it led to his assassination. And did that help us win the Vietnam War?
No.
These foreign, regime changes, the history is one disaster after another. Of course, history that I'm sure Donald Trump has never looked at.
We're close to 500 likes. Let's see if we can push the stream to 500 likes. This is from our good friend Patrick Murray.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have an opinion on psychedelics? Blue and red states are voting to re-regulate them, and HHS is conducting research on them in regards to mental health.
I'm too old for that. I'll let Sam, who's young and sharp, answer that. I told you there'd be a question for you.
I don't have a lot of knowledge about psychedelics. I have seen tidbits here and there about possible research and benefits in terms of people's mental health, but I don't feel
I don't
knowledgeable enough.
Yeah, I don't think there's been definitive.
We're
not medical professionals, so this is really outside our wheelhouse. But
I've also heard that, a year of meditation can give you the same benefits as a microdose of a psychedelic.
And from the research I've seen, you don't want to take these drugs. You just don't. You don't want to put these things in your body.
This is from, but we also don't know.
No, I'm just saying from what I've seen,
right, with
the disclaimer, we're not medical professionals, just my personal experience.
People are putting mushrooms in the chat. This is a $10 donation from our good friend Philip H. It is a question posed to me. Sam, they're asking me, what's your dad's favorite opera? You're asking me that question? How would I know the answer to that? Also, do you believe the Iranian war is justified?
I think answer that.
I think we've answered that throughout the evening.
We've answered that many
What's
times.
your favorite opera?
Aida. I've told you that before.
Okay. That's not something.
How are we doing on time?
We've got about 4 minutes left.
All right, take a couple more questions.
I am doing a post show tonight.
Oh,
yeah. So
that's great.
Stick around for that.
Yeah.
This is from Secular Monk. Hearing about Cuba a lot now. Are they Trump's next target? Rumor has it that they are trying to find a crime of some sort to do the Venezuelan thing.
Does seem to be a target for Trump. I'm not sure if he's just trying to starve them out and make the regime topple in that way. Of course, again, he has no end game, no solution other than chaos and destruction. And yes, he could pull a Venezuela there. It's even an easier target.
This is a $9.99 donation from the Mad Hatter Forever 23. They say, what are your thoughts on the non-aligned movement that was formed to oppose U.S. and Soviet dominance during the Cold War? Also, what do you think of this term for the administration, the Gish-Gallop presidency?
I kind of like the Gish-Gallop presidency, but I'm not sure it would resonate with most people. Would they know what it was? The non-aligned movement was, had some very noble ideology to try to defuse the Cold War. I had personal experience with them when I was speaking at the World Disarmament Conference. Unfortunately, non-aligned proved to be aligned. They had their own interests, their own priorities, and did not have as much of an impact as I had hoped.
This is from Marzum. They say, hi, Dr. Lichtman, do you think, and this is all in caps, that the Democrats will get it together, and then no more caps, before the next presidential election?
I think so. As I said, they're starting to improve their messaging. They do seem to be more united than before, but they don't have to be united. I've made this point before. Democrats have succeeded really well when they were a big tent. When were Democrats most dominant in the last 100 years, Sam? During what president?
FDR.
FDR. And guess what? They had the most disparate political coalition you can imagine. On the one hand, Northern liberals and African Americans. On the other hand, conservative, white, Jim Crow Democrats from the South. I'm not saying Democrats should incorporate Jim Crow, obviously. But my point was, you can succeed enormously well in politics by having a diverse coalition. As I said, the most important thing, if you're running for office, is be yourself. Don't try to figure out where the winds are blowing and sway in that direction. If you're inauthentic, people will pick up on that.
We've got 3 more donations here. Do you mind if we just go through those real quick?
It's all right with me.
This first one is $30 from Michael Sheffield. Thank you. They say, hi, this is a request to make a YouTube clip of Dr. Lichtman detailing what Trump's lies are, actual fabrications, delusions. I want to share it with my MAGA friends and family, please and thank you.
Oh my God, do I have 3 days to do that?
What do you mean? I think he's talking about clipping your talk this evening, possibly.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah. This is from Girthon. Trump just met with some Latin American leaders, all of them right-wingers, to form something called the Shield of the Americas to combat drug trafficking, but didn't invite Brazil, Mexico, or Colombia. Your opinion?
Where the drugs are coming from. Look, I think this is being headed by Kristi Noem, right?
Yeah.
Anything headed by Kristi Noem, I am very suspicious of. She couldn't have been more of a disaster as head of DHS. I have no confidence that she'll do a better job in this. And I'm not even sure what this is, to be honest with you. It seems to be something Trump made up to give her a sinecure after he fired her.
All right, our final question of the evening before the post show starts. I think you should be redirected. You have to give me a second to get on, but there's also a link pinned to the chat at the top. Our final question is from Terrell Suevo. Is Trump safe from being charged for meddling in state elections when he's out of office?
No, absolutely not. Once he's out of office, provided that the statute of limitations has not run, he is liable for anything that he did, except here's something new, and we know what that is, right, Sam? What the Supreme Court did. Gave him broad immunity for actions that are within his powers as president. And so that would present the issue of whether, his meddling was within or outside of his powers as president, and that would complicate the matter. But aside from that, presuming they're not covered by immunity, yes, he would be liable. That's why Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, because he did not want Richard Nixon to come to trial during his presidency and essentially consume the presidency. So it's a big, big burden. A, you got to overcome the immunity. B, you got to deal with statutes of limitations. And C, you got to deal with the fallout you're going to get from indicting an ex-president.
I want to give some shout outs to donators who didn't get on the air tonight. Thor D, Jen Sek, Robs, Black Hero, Wyatt Hamilton, Free Throw Guy, Kathy Crandall. We appreciate all of you. With that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight?
Thanks for the great questions, as always. I understand fabricator may not be the zingiest word we can come up with, but I think I would ask our audience, as we have done before, with Truth Not Tyranny, which I think is a great slogan, to see what you can come up with as an alternative to lies to describe what Trump does.
All right. Thank you, Dad. Say good night. See you all in the post show.
Good night.